The storm had long since passed, but the sea still whispered her name, Elena Marlowe, the woman who bought a ruined paradise for $250. Locals called her mad, said the resort was cursed, swallowed by the ocean itself. But they didn't see what she saw, the glint of something beneath the waves, older than the hotel, older than sin itself, gold that could buy empires, or bury them. She came seeking a second chance. What she found was a secret. The sea refused to forget a fortune that should have stayed lost forever. After the storm passed, the shoreline still trembled with the weight of what it had taken. The air carried the faint salt of grief, that soft, stinging scent of things broken and left behind. And there she was, standing at the edge of it all, Elena Marlowe, marine archaeologist turned almost nobody, her boots sinking into wet sand as she stared at what she had just purchased. The resort stood like a skeleton against the dawn. Once a place of luxury, now a hollow carcass of glass and salt, stained marble. The windows gaped like missing eyes, the balconies crumbled under the breath of the sea, and what once echoed with laughter now only hummed with the low sigh of waves inside its ruined halls. For $250, Elena had bought what the world forgot. The paperwork still felt unreal, a county auction, a half-hearted bid, a moment of madness. She told herself it was just a project, a restoration, but deep down she knew it was something else. It was hunger, desperation for meaning after too many shipwrecks, too many failed expeditions, too many years staring into the black water and seeing her own reflection stare back. The sea had always been her language, her escape. Yet every discovery she made had been stripped away by sponsors, by debt, by betrayal. When she saw the notice coastal property, seized and forfeited opening bid, $250, she laughed. Then she clicked bid anyway. Now the reality loomed before her. The Maravilla resort, or what was left of it, stretched across a cliffside like the bones of some dead god. The sun barely touched its edges. Clouds still churned from the earlier storm, bleeding soft light through shattered glass. A sign lay face down in the mud, its paint eaten by time. She turned it over and read the ghost of its name, Maravilla Spa and Sanctuary. Sanctuary. She whispered under her breath, the word tasting bitter. The locals in the nearby fishing town had warned her. They said the resort was cursed after the hurricane of 1972, that the sea swallowed part of it whole, including the underground spa. They said no one ever rebuilt because the land itself shifted, like it didn't want to be touched again. But Elena didn't believe in curses. She believed in what people buried. As she walked through the first cracked archway, her footsteps echoed against hollow marble. Moss had claimed the walls. Seagrass slithered through broken tiles. The chandeliers hung like drowned jellyfish, their crystals dull, but still catching light in pieces. Somewhere deep inside, water dripped in slow rhythm like the ticking of an unseen clock. She took a deep breath. The air was heavy with mold, sea salt, and the memory of something expensive long dead. And yet beneath it there was something else, a faint metallic scent, almost like blood, or gold. Her flashlight beam cut through the shadows. Every reflection shimmered wrong. Some corners seemed to breathe when the wind came through. The building moaned with every gust, as if remembering its own pain. Elena should have turned back. Instead, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from exhaustion that borders madness. She passed through a hallway of murals, faded images of sunlit women bathing in golden pools, hands raised toward the light. A strange irony. She'd spent her life underwater, chasing the sun from below. These painted faces, though cracked and ruined, seemed to watch her with pity. Outside, thunder murmured again far out at sea. The tide was returning. She could feel it. Her voice recorder clicked on as she muttered notes. Entry point stable, structure compromised but holding, evidence of subsidence, basement possibly flooded. Locals refer to it as the spa that swallowed the sea. The phrase lingered. The spa that swallowed the sea. She reached the old reception hall, a grand dome, fractured but magnificent. The mosaic floor depicted a sun with rays stretching across water, though half of it was now missing, consumed by a dark sinkhole yawning at the far end. The sea itself had begun to crawl back inside. Through the hole she could hear waves echoing from beneath, a hollow roar, deep and distant. She knelt near the edge and aimed her light down. The beam hit water. Beneath it, something metallic glinted just for a second before the tide surged and erased it. Her heart skipped, probably debris. She whispered, but her tone betrayed curiosity. The sound of gulls cut through the wind outside. The world felt vast and empty except for that one pulse of discovery hammering inside her chest. Elena stood, brushing dust from her jacket. She didn't notice how her hands trembled. The resort was dying, yes, but it wasn't dead yet. There was something beneath it, something the sea hadn't fully claimed. She stepped outside again, boots scraping against stone. The horizon glowed faintly orange now, the storm clouds thinning. Below the cliff, waves clawed at the rocks, white foam exploding like breath from a monster that refused to drown. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened. There was a rhythm to it, an unbroken song she'd heard since childhood. The ocean's voice. It always called her back, even when it had nearly taken her life. That night, she stayed in one of the few intact rooms. The ceiling leaked, the walls whispered, but it was shelter. She lit a candle, opened her worn notebook, and began to sketch the resort layout from memory. Every hallway, every chamber, every descent that might still exist beneath. A soft sound interrupted her thoughts, a distant metallic clang from somewhere deep below. It came once, then again. She froze. The sound was too deliberate, too alive. She rose slowly, candle trembling in her grip. Wind. She murmured to herself, though she didn't believe it. When she reached the balcony, the sea stretched black under a thin moon. And there on the far side of the ruins she saw it. A faint ripple of light beneath the waterline, as if the sea itself were breathing gold. Her pulse quickened. The wind whipped her hair across her face. For the first time she felt it, not fear, not awe, but the weight of destiny pressing down on her. Something was waiting below. Something time had tried to drown but couldn't. She whispered to the waves, "You hid something, didn't you?" The sea answered with silence. Only the hiss of foam against stone replied, and the faint echo of that metallic sound again, fading into the dark. As the candle flickered beside her, Elena realized this was no ordinary ruin. The sea hadn't destroyed this place by accident. It had taken it back, and now, somehow, she was part of its unfinished story. As the night deepened, she stayed on the balcony until the candle died. Far below, the water shimmered faintly again like the ghost of a sun, trapped beneath the waves, and she knew, without a doubt, that her life had just shifted forever. The ruins were only the beginning. By morning, the wind had stilled, but the resort seemed even more haunted in the calm. The air was heavy, almost watchful. Salt mist drifted through the broken hallways, carrying whispers that might have been memory. Elena moved through them slowly, her boots crunching on glass and coral dust, her mind turning over the same question: why would anyone build so close to the sea and then abandon it to drown? Her recorder clicked on again. Day 2, structural assessment ongoing, lower levels appear flooded. Locals advised against entering, reasons unspecified. I'll need to verify. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Beneath the measured tone, her heartbeat was a drum. She descended through the cracked atrium staircase, careful not to step where the marble had split. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of deep water. In the half-light, mold patterns looked like maps, veins leading downward. She traced one with her gloved hand and whispered, almost to herself, "Everything leads below." At the landing, she found a door swollen shut from humidity. Its brass plaque was still legible, "Thermal Spa, Private Access." The letters shimmered faintly under her flashlight, the last survivors of a once grand design. She pressed her shoulder to it. The hinges groaned a sound like the resort exhaling, and it gave way. A corridor stretched ahead, sloping gently down, its walls sweating with condensation. Water dripped from a ruptured pipe somewhere in the dark, echoing like a heartbeat. The deeper she went, the louder it became, rhythmic, alive. When she reached the bottom, the passage opened into a submerged viewing lounge. The glass wall facing the sea had cracked, but held a fragile barrier between her and the Atlantic. Beyond the fissures, the ocean glimmered in strange pulses, the way it does when sunlight filters through turbulence. Only there was no sunlight now, just light from nowhere, gold, tinted, faint, and unreal. Elena stood breathless, staring at the shimmer. Refraction, she told herself, it's just minerals reflection. But the words felt hollow. It looked nothing like reflection. It looked like movement, deliberate, coiling in slow arcs, like light trapped and breathing. Her reflection in the glass trembled. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw another shape behind her own, tall, blurred, human. She spun around, nothing but columns and shadow. The silence afterward was too sharp, the kind that hums inside your ears. She forced herself back to focus. This was how the mind played tricks underwater, even without diving. Isolation, echo, and the ocean's voice could bend perception until imagination felt real. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the sea was watching her watch it. She set her bag down and unfolded a set of old blueprints she'd pulled from the county archive. The drawings were incomplete, water damaged, but one section caught her eye: sublevel 2, mineral pool complex, restricted access. Yet there was no visible entrance. The corridor she stood in wasn't marked either. Someone had erased it before the plans were filed. Her jaw tightened. She traced the ink with her thumb, feeling the paper's rough scars. "So you wanted to hide something," she murmured, noted. A sudden gust of wind howled through the cracks above, rattling the old pipes. For a moment, it almost sounded like a voice. She looked up sharply. "Hello." Only dripping water answered. She shut her eyes and breathed deep. Fear, she knew, was just the body's way of preparing for discovery. She'd felt it before in caves off Cyprus, in the black hulls of sunken ships, in silence that stretched too long. It always meant she was close to something important. She stepped closer to the glass, her reflection trembling against the golden blur beyond. "Whatever you are," she whispered, "I'll find you." Outside the tide shifted, and for a brief moment the shimmer flared gold, breaking through blue like sunlight on metal. Then it was gone. The pressure wave hit a second later, a deep thud that made the glass moan. Elena stumbled back, hand clutching her recorder. Her voice shook as she spoke into it. "Subterranean activity detected. Possible collapse offshore. Check tidal interference data later." But in her eyes there was no confusion, only recognition. The sea had answered her challenge. She turned back toward the stairway, but something in the periphery caught her attention, a door half hidden behind a fallen column. She brushed the debris aside. The handle was corroded, but the lock looked newer, almost untouched by salt. Modern, even. Someone had been here long after the resort was abandoned. Her pulse climbed. She tugged on the handle. It didn't move. She tried again. Still nothing. When she leaned closer, she noticed faint etchings on the frame, not numbers, but letters, curved like symbols from an older language. She traced them with her gloved fingertip. The metal felt warm, impossibly so. A drop of condensation ran down from the ceiling and sizzled when it touched the lock. She jerked her hand back. What the hell? The warmth faded instantly, as if aware of being noticed. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She took a step back, mind racing through logical explanations, geothermal venting, residual energy from submerged systems, chemical reactions. None made sense. She left the lock untouched for now. But as she climbed back toward the atrium, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't been the first to try. When she reached the upper floor, daylight had thickened into the pale hue of evening. She stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the coast. The sea was calm again, almost unnaturally so. Even the gulls were gone. Down below, fishermen moved like dark specks across the shallows. She watched them for a moment before one of them glanced up, spotting her silhouette against the ruin. He froze. Then, slowly, he raised his hand not in greeting, but in warning. Elena frowned. She waved back, uncertain, but the man only shook his head and pointed toward the horizon. There, in the distance, black water churned in a slow spiral, a whirlpool that shouldn't exist so close to shore. It vanished seconds later, leaving only ripples. When she looked back toward the fisherman, he was already walking away. That night, she sat by the cracked window, her candle flickering, her notes scattered across the floor. The ocean outside was silent, but her thoughts roared. The old lock, the glow beneath the waves, the erased sublevel, all threads in the same design. She opened her notebook to a blank page and wrote one line, pressing the pen so hard it tore the paper. Something is buried beneath the spar. The candlelight swayed, stretching her shadow across the wall. She watched it move long, reaching, almost like a second self, rising from the dark. She didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out of waking dreams where the ocean whispered her name and gold glimmered beneath her feet. By dawn, she made her decision. She'd dive the next day not for treasure, not yet, but for truth, to see what the sea had stolen and why it refused to let go. As the first light crept across the waves, painting the ruined resort in pale fire, Elena felt the faintest thrill of purpose return to her, that dangerous, beautiful certainty that discovery was close. Somewhere beneath those broken tiles, the past was waiting, and the sea, silent and infinite, was holding its breath. As the morning tide began to rise, she whispered into the wind, "Tomorrow, I follow you down." And though the waves said nothing, their rhythm answered in kind, soft, slow, inevitable, as if the ocean itself had just agreed. As the day broke over the ruins, Elena Marlowe stood at the edge of her crumbling sanctuary, unaware that what waited below would make her name echo across history. The sea had chosen her. After the night of restless dreams, dawn arrived heavy and silent, the kind of silence that precedes revelation. The storm had cleared, but the air still felt thick, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. Elena Marlowe stood barefoot at the edge of the cliff, the ruined resort behind her, the horizon washed in dull gold. Below, the waves lapped against the submerged terraces, gentle but insistent, like an invitation she could no longer ignore. Her dive gear lay beside her in the sand-weathered tanks, a cracked faceplate, and a camera housing she had salvaged from her last expedition. It was all she had left from a career that once promised greatness. Now it was her only bridge between ruin and redemption. She checked the straps, adjusted the pressure gauge, and whispered to herself, "Let's see what you're hiding." The words carried no arrogance, only a quiet resolve. The kind that comes when a person has nothing left to lose. The descent began at low tide. The sea was unusually calm, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the skeletal remains of the resort above. Elena waded in, the water cold enough to bite through her wetsuit. Each step sank her deeper into silence until the world above vanished completely. The ocean's color shifted around her blue, giving way to green, then to a murky amber hue as sunlight fractured through debris. The skeletal beams of the resort reached into the depths like ribs of a drowned cathedral. Fish darted between them, flashing like fragments of memory. She turned on her light. The beam sliced through the water, revealing the entrance she'd glimpsed from the atrium, a jagged archway leading into darkness. The tiled floor beneath her fins bore faded mosaics of suns and waves, symbols repeating like a mantra, Solara. She paused, breathing slow. The word meant of the sun. Strange, she thought, that a place so deeply buried would worship the light. Her fin brushed something hard. She looked down and saw a cracked emblem embedded in the floor, a circular insignia with rays extending outward. The same motif she'd seen upstairs, but this one gleamed faintly beneath a film of algae. She reached down and rubbed it clean with her glove. The gold beneath shone through, brighter than it should have after decades underwater. Her heartbeat quickened. She recorded a note through her mic, confirming sighting of metallic emblem, material possible gold alloy, insignia reads Solara chamber, repeating motif across site, may indicate central structure or vault. The last word lingered, vault. She moved deeper into the passage. The walls here were smoother, reinforced, built to resist pressure. This wasn't casual architecture. Someone had designed it to endure, to protect. The light from her torch scattered against the water's murk, painting her surroundings in trembling gold. And then, without warning, the corridor widened into a cavernous chamber. Her breath hitched. The Solara spa. What remained of it floated before her like a dream frozen in time. The main pool lay at the center, half filled with sediment and coral. Marble benches ringed the edges, their surfaces ghosted with silt. Fragments of mirrors shimmered faintly on the walls, catching her light like stars trapped in deep water. Elena hovered in place, overwhelmed by the surreal beauty of it. It wasn't destruction, it was transformation. Nature had not erased this place. It had claimed it, adorned it. Vines of coral hung like chandeliers. Schools of fish drifted through broken arches, and through it all, the faint shimmer of gold dust floated in lazy spirals, turning the water itself into liquid sunlight. She raised her camera and began to film. The frame caught everything: the slow pulse of light, the silence, the illusion of life in decay. Incredible. She whispered, her voice barely a breath inside the mask. As she circled the pool, something strange caught her eye. The sediment near the bottom wasn't uniform. A ridge ran beneath it, deliberate, structured. She shone her light there and froze. The beam revealed the corner of something metallic buried in the silt. It wasn't a pipe or rebar. It was flat, squared, too precise for nature. Her mind raced. Could it be machinery, a safe, a door? She hovered lower, brushing away the sand with her glove. More gold flashed through, dulled but unmistakable. The pattern matched stacked bars, tightly aligned, extending deeper beneath the debris. Her breath quickened in the regulator. She steadied herself, pressing the urge to celebrate. Could be plating, she said aloud, forcing logic over instinct. Could be. But the words failed. She knew that shape. She had seen it before in museums, in old wartime vaults. The dimensions, the glint, it was unmistakable. Gold. Her pulse thundered in her ears. For a moment, the world tilted, years of failure, loss, and ridicule, collapsing under the weight of what shimmered below her. If even a fraction of it was real, it would be worth millions, enough to rebuild her life, her name, her purpose. Enough to silence every doubt that had ever followed her. But as quickly as excitement rose, unease crept in. Why was it here? Who would hide this much gold in a spa? And why bury it beneath water, behind sealed doors and erased blueprints? A faint vibration rippled through the water, subtle, like a hum from below. She turned sharply, scanning the shadows. The sound deepened, almost mechanical, then faded again. No movement, no life except hers. Her rational mind whispered, pressure shift. Her instincts said otherwise. The gold lay silent, but something about its stillness felt alive, watching, waiting. Her oxygen gauge beeped softly, time to ascend. Reluctantly, she backed away, eyes locked on the shimmer beneath the silt. "I'll be back," she said quietly. "I'm not done yet." The swim back felt longer. The light above seemed farther away, dimmer, as though the sea itself wanted to hold her a little longer. When she finally broke the surface, gasping in the open air, the sky had already begun to fade to gray. The tide was rising faster than expected. She pulled herself onto the cracked terrace, collapsing onto her knees. Her hands shook as she peeled off the mask. Her face was cold, pale, her heartbeat erratic, a strange blend of awe and fear. She turned toward the sea, still shimmering faintly at the edges of the ruins. There was gold beneath her, real, impossible gold. But as she sat there, catching her breath, she noticed something that made her stomach twist. Her dive line, the rope she had anchored to the old column before descending, was no longer taut. It hung loose, drifting toward the waves. Someone had cut it. Elena froze, staring at the frayed end. The sea was calm, motionless. No footprints near the gear. No movement on the cliffs above. But she knew what she saw. The fibers were clean, severed by a blade, not torn by current. Her eyes scanned the empty horizon. The resort had been silent when she arrived. Now, she wasn't sure she was alone. She gathered her gear, her movements quick, mechanical. Every creak of the ruins echoed louder now. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps in the distance. The sun dipped low, turning the waves black with reflection. As she reached the doorway of the ruined lobby, she stopped, her breath caught. On the wall, carved into the plaster with something sharp, were 3 fresh letters wet with salt and recent touch. SOL. The rest of the word trailed off, unfinished. She backed away, heart pounding. The sea roared again, crashing harder against the rocks below, as if mocking her fear. She didn't run, not yet, but every instinct screamed to. The daylight died fast, and with it the illusion of safety. Elena looked back once more at the darkening water. Somewhere below, gold slept beneath centuries of silence, and now something else had awakened with it. As the wind howled through the broken arches, she whispered to herself, "The sea remembers." And in that moment she realized she wasn't just exploring ruins anymore. She was trespassing on history's secret. As night fell, the first stars appeared above the black water, faint and trembling like distant eyes, watching her return to the surface world. But the truth she had uncovered would not stay buried for long. As the tide crept higher, whispering against the stones, Elena Marlowe stood alone in the ruins, the word Solara echoing through her mind, radiant, dangerous, eternal. The gold beneath her was real, and something deep in her soul already knew nothing that shines so bright stays buried without reason. The sea had opened its hand. Now it would see what she would do with what it offered. The wind howled again that night, low and uneven, brushing through the ruined hallways like a voice made of air. The candlelight in Elena's room fluttered, stretching her shadow across the wall, tall, tremoring, uncertain. Sleep never came. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, the slow shimmer beneath the water, the golden bars sleeping under silt, the soft hum that felt like a pulse. By dawn, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but so had something else, obsession. Her hands shook as she poured coffee from a thermos, her mind already deep beneath the surface. The image of those carved letters, SOL, haunted her. Who had been here before her? What did they want? The storm clouds from the night before had drifted away, leaving the morning eerily clear. The sea was too calm, almost deliberate in its stillness, like a stage waiting for the next act. She packed her dive kit again, methodically, her movements quicker now, less careful. She'd seen enough to know she couldn't wait. Every instinct told her to leave, but curiosity was a current stronger than fear. She returned to the terrace where she'd surfaced the day before. The rope was gone completely, now swept away or taken, she couldn't tell. The footprints from her last dive were still there, fading in the damp sand alongside something new. Smaller prints, barefoot, leading toward the water, and stopping there. A chill ran through her. Whoever had carved SOL hadn't left by land. She hesitated only a moment before slipping back into the water. The world beneath was darker today. Silt hung suspended in the currents like smoke, and the light from her torch looked weaker against the thickening gloom. She passed the broken corridor again, the gold emblem half buried in coral dust. The pressure seemed heavier, the silence thicker. When she reached the Solara chamber once more, her breath caught not from wonder this time, but from unease. Something had changed. The sediment near the central pool had shifted. Her fins brushed against new trails in the silt-long grooves leading toward the center, as if something heavy had been dragged. She floated still, scanning the edges of the chamber. The faint hum from before returned deeper now, resonating through the metal and stone like a heartbeat under the floor. Her voice cracked through the calm mic. Structural resonance, possible subsidence from yesterday's pressure wave. I need to record this. She set her camera down on a stable ledge and swept the light in a slow arc. The beam fell across the far wall, illuminating something she hadn't noticed before, a mosaic, half hidden behind a collapsed column. She swam closer. It depicted a woman rising from a pool of gold, her eyes closed, her hands open toward a blazing sun. The artistry was exquisite even through decay. Every tile shone faintly as if lit from within. But what struck Elena most wasn't the beauty. It was the inscription etched below, almost erased by coral, Lux in tenebris manet. The light remains in darkness. She stared at the words for a long time, her breath fogging the mask. Then, slowly, she turned her torch downward toward the base of the mosaic. The stone floor was cracked there, and something glimmered faintly beneath a reflection that didn't match her light. She knelt, brushed away the silt. Beneath the tile lay a seam, thin, metallic, deliberate. Her heart skipped. A hatch. Her gloved fingers searched the edges. It was locked, of course, sealed by corrosion and pressure. She tested it once, twice, no movement. A surge of determination burned through her exhaustion. She unhooked a small pry bar from her belt, wedged it into the seam, and pressed hard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a click. The sound was sharp, echoing through the chamber like a whisper from stone. A small stream of bubbles escaped from the crack. Her pulse jumped. The hatch trembled, shifting slightly open, revealing blackness within. She aimed her torch. Nothing reflected back, just endless dark. Elena hesitated, every nerve in her body screaming caution. She should have marked the spot, returned with proper gear, maybe even a team. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. Discovery wasn't meant to be shared. Not this one. She inched forward, just enough to peer through the narrow gap. The beam of light cut down into a vertical shaft, walls lined with what looked like brass plates. Symbols etched on each one. They weren't letters she recognized. They looked older, almost ritualistic. The hum intensified, no longer distant, but vibrating through the metal itself. She instinctively reached for her camera to capture it, but then, from somewhere below the hatch, a flicker. Not light, movement. Something drifted through the shaft, slow and graceful, like fabric caught in current yet solid. Her brain couldn't define it before instinct yanked her backward. She kicked away from the hatch, heartbeat hammering through the regulator. The hum stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. She waited, 1 second, 2. Nothing moved. Only the gold dust continued to spiral through the water, peaceful and indifferent. When her oxygen alarm began to beep, she forced herself upward. Her ascent was fast, too fast, the need for air overtaking the need for calm. She broke the surface gasping, tearing off her mask, sucking in the heavy salt air. The sea looked empty, endless. But as she treaded water, she saw it again, faint light rippling below, right where she'd opened the hatch. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. That night, she sat wrapped in a blanket inside the ruined lobby, shivering though the air was warm. Her dive log was open beside her, the words she'd written shaking across the page. Solara chamber confirmed, sublevel discovered, unknown symbols, metallic resonance, possible sealed vault, unexplained motion, not marine life. Her pen hovered, then she added, "It knew I was there." The firelight from her lantern flickered against the marble columns, throwing her reflection in fragments across the room. The resort groaned softly in the tide, like an old ship straining against its moorings. She stared toward the broken windows, where the sea glimmered under the moon, calm, deceitfully calm. She thought of the mosaic, the woman of gold and light, hands raised to the sun. The light remains in darkness. The phrase echoed through her like a prophecy. What if the gold wasn't treasure at all? What if it was something meant to stay hidden, something sealed, not stored? A sound broke her thoughts, a faint metallic clink from outside, near the terrace. Elena froze. She reached for her flashlight, flicked it on, and stepped slowly toward the sound. The beam swept across the broken tiles, nothing. Then, on the far wall, something gleamed. Her breath caught. Her dive camera, the one she'd left underwater near the hatch. It sat propped against the wall, dripping salt water onto the floor. The casing was scratched, the strap torn clean through. Someone had placed it there carefully, deliberately. Elena's pulse thundered. She lifted it with trembling hands, wiped the lens and pressed play. The screen flickered static, distortion then cleared. The footage showed the Solara chamber exactly as she'd left it. Then the camera shifted as if bumped. The view tilted toward the hatch. The seam glowed faintly, golden dust swirling faster now. And then just before the feed cut, a shadow crossed the frame, human-shaped. Moving closer, the playback ended. Elena dropped the camera, her breath shallow. The resort around her seemed to breathe again, the wind through the cracks, the sigh of the sea. Somewhere far below, she imagined the hatch trembling once more, waiting to be opened. She stood motionless for a long time, staring out at the horizon. The ocean glimmered softly beneath the moonlight, beautiful, endless, unknowable. She could almost hear it whisper, not in words but in rhythm, the kind of rhythm that pulls ships under. As dawn approached, Elena packed her equipment again. Her fear was real, but so was her purpose. She wasn't leaving now, not after this. Whatever slept beneath the Solara chamber wasn't done with her yet. The tide swelled, licking at the stones of the terrace, carrying the faint shimmer of gold beneath its surface. She watched the water rise, slow and deliberate, and whispered to herself, almost reverently, if the sea wants to keep its secrets, it shouldn't have shown me the door. The waves answered with a hush, and as the sun broke over the water, lighting the ruins in pale fire, Elena Marlowe understood that what she'd found was not an end, but the beginning of something vast, ancient, and alive. As the morning wind swept through the broken halls, the sound it carried was not quite human, almost a voice, echoing faintly from below, Solara, Solara, and the sea, as if remembering its own secret, shimmered once more, gold blooming beneath the blue. As the day began, Elena knew the descent was far from over. The ocean had opened its mouth, and now it was calling her name. The nights had changed. Ever since the second dive, sleep no longer came easily to Elena Marlowe. When it did, it came in flashes, half-formed visions of gold swirling through dark water, of faceless figures walking along the seabed, their eyes glowing like submerged lanterns. Sometimes she heard voices, muffled by distance, calling her name as if through miles of tide. She would wake in silence, her skin cold, her breath shallow, the waves whispering outside the cracked window. Morning brought no comfort. The sea now seemed to breathe differently, its rhythm heavier, slower, deliberate. Even when the surface was calm, the undertow felt alive. Every hour, she found herself staring toward the horizon, as though something there might rise from it. She tried to reason with herself. Sleep deprivation, decompression, stress. The mind could bend truth when exhaustion took hold, but deep down she knew the line between reason and instinct was already thinning. 3 days had passed since she opened the hatch beneath the Solara chamber. She hadn't dived again, not yet. Instead, she buried herself in research, desperate for a rational thread. Her makeshift desk in the ruined lobby was covered with books, old blueprints, and newspaper clippings she'd gathered from the local archive. The resort's past was a puzzle with half the pieces missing, but the fragments she had were enough to chill her blood. The Maravilla Resort and Solara Spa had opened in 1936, a sanctuary for the elite, as one faded brochure described. Built under the direction of a reclusive magnate, Edric Solara, the project was celebrated as a masterpiece of Art Deco engineering. The papers hailed its sunlit architecture, its healing mineral baths, its philosophy of radiant wealth. But there was something darker beneath the surface of every glowing article. The resort had closed abruptly after only 6 years, no explanation given. Its owners vanished, staff dismissed, guests refunded in silence. And within months, a storm destroyed most of the coastline, swallowing the spa completely. Elena traced the headline with her finger: Mysterious Collapse of Maravilla, Storm or Sabotage. She turned the page, revealing a grainy black and white photograph, the resort under construction. A group of men in suits stood near the scaffolding, smiling stiffly for the camera. But one face stood out, a tall man standing slightly apart. His suit was pristine, his posture rigid, his eyes dark. The caption read, Edric Solara, founder and proprietor. Elena stared at the photograph. There was something unsettling about his expression, not joy, not pride, but possession, the way one might look at something already buried. She pulled out her notebook, flipping to a page marked Symbolic Analysis. She'd written the inscription from the mosaic in neat letters: Lux in tenebris man, et the light remains in darkness. Underneath, she'd drawn the emblem she'd seen underwater, the sun with outward rays, engraved in gold. Around it, she'd written fragments of her thoughts: sun as divine wealth, purity through possession, vault beneath spa equals possible containment, Solara name derived from solar worship of light, gold, perfection. The notes looked chaotic now, written by a hand that had begun to tremble. She exhaled, rubbing her eyes. Outside, the sea moaned softly against the rocks, the wind carrying distant echoes. That afternoon, she visited the fishing town again, her first time among people since the purchase. The locals had grown wary of her. Conversation stopped when she entered the store. Eyes followed her movements, heavy with suspicion. At the dockside tavern, she approached an old man cleaning nets. His skin was leathered from sun and salt, his eyes pale like glass. "You're the woman who bought the ruins," he said before she spoke. Elena nodded. "You know them well." He laughed dry, mirthless. "Nobody knows that place. We stay clear of it. My father worked the boats when they built that resort. Said it wasn't right to dig that deep. The sea remembers where it wants to be." "Do you know the name Edric Solara?" she asked. The man's hand stilled. He looked at her for a long moment, then spat into the water. "A collector," he muttered. "That's what they called him. Collected everything, art, relics, even people," some said. During the war, men like him didn't buy gold, they washed it. Elena frowned. "Washed it?" He nodded slowly, made it clean. hid it in places nobody would question. Hospitals, charities, resorts said he was healing souls. His voice cracked, but some of that gold, it cried. A shiver crept up her spine. Cried, the old man met her eyes, his expression hollow. You've been down there, haven't you? You heard it. Elena froze. What do you mean? He wiped his hands, ignoring her question. You shouldn't go back. The ocean took what it was owed. Don't try to raise it again. She wanted to ask more, but he turned away, his silence final. That night, back in the resort, rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the broken roof. Elena sat near the window, watching the waves glow faintly under lightning flashes. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale, sleepless, almost spectral. Her mind replayed the old man's words, some of that gold, it cried. What did that mean? Could sound even travel that deep without distortion? Could something trapped within the vault create that humming resonance she'd heard? She switched on her audio recorder and played back the last dive log. The static hissed at first, bubbles, movement, faint echoes. Then, beneath it, she heard something she hadn't noticed before. A low, rhythmic sound, not machinery, not shifting metal. A voice, faint, almost human. Her blood went cold. She increased the volume, leaned closer. The whisper came again, distant but clear enough to twist her gut. Don't awaken. The rain outside intensified, slamming against the glass like fists. Elena's heart pounded. She replayed it 3 times. Each time, the word became clearer, awaken. Her rational mind fought to explain it. Echo distortion, audio overlap, nothing supernatural, but her body didn't believe her. Every instinct screamed that the message wasn't an accident. She closed the recorder and sat in silence, the storm's rhythm sinking with her pulse. At some point, exhaustion pulled her under, not into rest, but into something closer to a trance. She found herself standing in the Solara chamber again. The water was gone. The floor gleamed like molten gold. Shadows moved along the walls, tall, elegant, faceless. They whispered to one another in a language she couldn't understand, each syllable like a ripple through her chest. She looked down. Her reflection shimmered in the golden pool at her feet, but it wasn't her face that stared back. It was his, the man from the photograph, Edric Solara. His mouth moved soundlessly, but the words reached her like a thought pressed directly into her skull. The light remains in darkness, but you opened the door. The floor trembled. The gold began to melt away, revealing black water beneath. Hands reached from it, pale, gleaming, desperate. She screamed and woke, gasping in darkness, drenched in sweat. The candle had burned out. The wind outside was still. Only the sea's soft hiss filled the silence. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to steady her breath. Just a dream, she whispered, just a dream. But when she lowered her hands, she saw something on her wrist, a smear of fine gold dust. Shimmering faintly under the moonlight seeping through the cracks, she froze, staring at it. The residue glittered like the water from the Solara chamber. It clung to her skin even as she rubbed it. Her heart began to race. She hadn't dived today. She hadn't touched the water. Outside, the sea exhaled again, slow, deep, almost like laughter. Elena stepped back from the window, trembling, her voice breaking as she whispered, "What have I brought back with me?" The wind answered, whispering through the empty halls, the faintest echo of her own words, repeated from nowhere. Brought back. She stared into the dark, realizing that the ocean wasn't done speaking to her. And somewhere far below the surface, in the buried vault of gold and silence, something had begun to stir. As the last candlelight flickered and died, Elena Marlowe understood the sea had memory, and it was remembering her. As thunder rolled far out at sea, she stood motionless, the faint shimmer still glistening on her wrist like the mark of something that had claimed her. The waves outside whispered once more, steady and patient. The ocean never forgets, The morning broke gray and soundless, the kind of light that never truly warms the world. Elena hadn't slept again. The gold dust still faintly clung to her wrist, even after she scrubbed it raw. When she looked closely, it seemed to pulse, catching light that wasn't there. She tried to convince herself it was residue from her last dive, but every time she blinked, it shimmered differently, as though alive. She dressed in silence, avoiding the cracked mirror on the wall. Her reflection felt heavier these days, her eyes darker, her movements slower. It wasn't exhaustion, it was weight. The kind of weight that comes from knowing something no one else in the world can understand. Outside, the tide was low again. The resort's drowned terraces glistened like wet bones. The air was still, yet she swore she heard something beneath it, a faint rhythmic pulse far below the surface. Not sound exactly, more like a vibration that traveled through stone, water, and skin. She tried to distract herself with work. The diary she'd found in the office days before lay open on the table, its pages water, warped, half illegible. The ink had bled into soft gray patterns, but she could still make out certain lines. The light beneath must remain veiled. Purity through submersion, gold as both sickness and cure. We cleanse what man corrupted. Elena read the last line again, tracing the words with her fingertip. Cleanse what man corrupted. It sounded more like confession than business. Whoever wrote this, Solara himself, perhaps hadn't been building a spa for healing. He'd been building something to hide. A sudden gust of wind slammed the window open. Papers scattered across the floor. She jumped, heart pounding, before realizing what it was. But then, something else caught her eye, the edge of a photograph, tucked between two fallen pages. She picked it up, brushing the dust away. It showed a group of workers standing ankle deep in water, smiling beside what looked like the spa's grand pool during construction. But in the bottom corner, faintly visible, was a symbol etched into the wet stone behind them, the same Solara sun she'd seen underwater. Only this one was different. There were 13 rays instead of 12. She turned the photo over. In faded pencil, a single note. The 13th must never rise. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just architecture. It was ritual. The Solara emblem wasn't decoration, it was design. The vault, the chamber, the layout of the entire resort, they all centered around that symbol. 13 rays, 12 visible, and 1 hidden. She grabbed a pencil and began to sketch the resort's outline on a sheet of paper, connecting the key structures she'd explored so far: the atrium, the viewing corridor, the submerged chamber. Each point aligned perfectly, like spokes of a sunburst. But there was a missing segment directly below where the sea now lay deepest. The 13th ray. Elena exhaled, staring at the drawing. Whatever was sealed beneath the spar wasn't just treasure. It was deliberate. Purposeful, concealed. She looked out toward the ocean again. The tide had risen slightly, the light shifting under the surface. The shimmer she'd seen days ago was back, faint, like gold dust in suspension. Her breath steadied. Decision settled into her like gravity. She was going back down. The dive that afternoon felt different. The sea had lost its welcome. It no longer embraced her descent. It resisted, dragging her downward through thick, cold pressure. The light from above vanished faster than before, swallowed by shadow. She kept her breathing even, her mind sharp. But something deep within whispered she was no longer the one in control. As she entered the Solara chamber again, her flashlight flickered. The room looked emptier somehow, as though parts of it had been rearranged. The gold dust still drifted in the water, but slower, heavier, like it was waiting. She swam toward the mosaic wall, the one that had concealed the hatch. It was sealed again. The tiles she'd pried loose days ago were perfectly intact, not broken, not shifted, restored. Her blood ran cold. She knew what she'd done. She'd broken that seal herself. The tools she'd used still lay on the ocean floor, rusting near the entryway. Yet here the wall stood, flawless, untouched. She raised her hand to it. The surface felt warm, too warm. Then, faintly, a vibration pulsed beneath her palm. Like a heartbeat, her camera recorded everything, the red light blinking faintly. Day 6. She whispered through the regulator. Substructure reformation observed. Possible geothermal reaction, but it feels organic. The last word barely left her mouth before something shifted in the dark. A low groan rolled through the chamber, not mechanical, not natural. It was deep and resonant, like the exhale of something vast. The sediment around her stirred. Her light darted toward the far corner, where the floor cracked open slightly, releasing a stream of tiny bubbles. She hovered still, afraid to move. The water pressure trembled. The sound came again, closer this time, a layered tone, almost like a whisper multiplied by 1,000 throats. Her flashlight flickered, then went out. Panic surged. She grabbed her backup light, flicked it on and froze. Something hovered near the far wall. At first, she thought it was a reflection, a trick of light, but it moved slow, deliberate. A silhouette, human-shaped but impossibly fluid, its edges blurred like smoke underwater. Elena's breath quickened, fogging her mask. "Who's there?" she said instinctively, though the words dissolved into the current. The figure tilted its head, as if curious. Then it drifted closer, no kicking, no swimming, just motionless glide. The water around it shimmered gold. Her instincts screamed to flee, but she couldn't move. Something in her chest locked, freezing her in place. The figure stopped just a few feet away. Behind her mask, her eyes widened. Its face was indistinct, just the faintest shape of features beneath the distortion. But for a brief second, when the gold dust swirled through it, she saw the impossible, the same angular jaw, the same cold gaze, the man from the photograph. Edric Solara. Her scream never reached the surface. The figure dissolved as quickly as it had appeared, collapsing into a burst of light and silt that vanished in seconds. Elena shot upward, lungs burning, her body trembling as she broke through the surface, gasping for air. The sky had darkened while she was below. A storm was forming again, the wind gathering like a warning. She dragged herself onto the terrace, collapsing to her knees, choking on air and salt. The world above felt unreal, too bright, too sharp. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her dive camera still blinked red. She ripped the regulator from her mouth, staring out at the blackening horizon. Lightning flashed far out at sea. Thunder followed, not above but below, deep and guttural. Something was happening down there, something awake. As the rain began to fall, she checked the camera. The footage replayed in shaky fragments, bubbles, drift, her flashlight beam, the wall, and then, just before the lens glitched, a faint figure of gold standing in the dark. She dropped the device, hands trembling. The storm broke fully then, sheets of rain hammering the ruins. The sea rose, crashing against the cliffs, as if trying to reclaim her, to erase her intrusion. Elena staggered inside the half-collapsed lobby, drenched and shivering. Every sound in the building had come alive, the groan of beams, the hiss of wind through cracks, the whisper of water seeping under doors. It all felt like one voice, ancient, angry, familiar. She clutched the photo of Solara to her chest, her voice trembling as she whispered to herself, "He's still here." The wind rattled the broken windows as if in response. She didn't sleep that night. Every crash of thunder sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the floor. Every flicker of lightning cast his shadow across the wall. By dawn, the storm had torn half the shoreline away. Elena stood at the window, staring at the sea grey, endless, unrepentant. Beneath it, the Solara chamber waited, breathing. Whatever she had uncovered, it wasn't just history. It was something conscious, something that had been waiting for a name to call again, and now that name was hers. As the sun rose behind the clouds, dim and trembling, Elena whispered to the horizon, not as a scientist, not as a survivor, but as someone who finally understood the truth too late. The gold wasn't buried. It was imprisoned. The waves answered in thunder, and the ocean, restless and alive, began to stir once more. As she turned away, her reflection lingered in the shattered glass, and for the briefest moment, it smiled back when she did not. By the time the storm subsided, the coastline had changed. The air hung thick with salt and ruin. Whole portions of the cliff had collapsed, revealing veins of old stone and shards of foundation that hadn't seen light in decades. The resort itself leaned closer to the sea, now less a building, more a wound on the edge of the world. Elena Marlowe stood at the water's edge, soaked to the bone, staring down into what the storm had revealed. The earth had cracked open near the lower terraces, where jagged concrete once sealed the spa's submerged passageways. Now there was an opening, a dark, jagged mouth exhaling mist and brine. She tightened the strap on her flashlight and whispered to herself, "You wanted truth. Here it is." Her voice was steady, but her pulse wasn't. Every rational part of her mind screamed to stop, to turn back before the tide reclaimed what the storm had exposed. But reason had lost its weight days ago. The sea had shown her too much, called her by name, and now she couldn't look away. As she stepped closer, her boot slipped on the wet stone, and she caught herself on a corroded railing. The metal felt warm under her fingers, almost alive. She let go quickly. From below, a faint glow pulsed golden and deep, like light trapped beneath miles of glass. The opening led into a narrow stairwell, its walls slick with sea moss and salt veins that shimmered faintly under her beam. Every step downward felt like walking into another era, a buried temple built from silence and ambition. The sound of dripping water echoed off the stone, rhythmic and eternal. Halfway down, she found a brass plaque embedded into the wall. Most of the text was gone, eaten by corrosion, but a few words survived. Solara Chamber authorized personnel only founded. 1938, purity through immersion purity. She muttered bitterly, "That's what you called it." At the bottom of the stairwell, the passage widened into a massive corridor that sloped gently into the sea. The floor was marble, cracked but gleaming with moisture. It was as if gold dust had mixed with the salt, creating an unnatural shimmer. Elena paused at the water's edge. The tide inside the corridor was unnaturally still, as though the sea outside waited, holding its breath. She knelt, touched the surface. It was warm, almost feverish. Her reflection wavered, fractured by faint ripples, but her eyes caught something else below the surface. Movement, slow and luminous. Her breath caught. "It's open." She whispered. The chamber below the one sealed by the hatch had awakened with the storm. She donned her mask, steadied her breathing, and slipped into the water. The temperature shocked her at first, not cold, but heavy, pressing against her skin like air, too thick to breathe. As she descended, the light grew stronger, gold bleeding through the darkness like sunlight filtering through veins of amber. She kicked downward deeper until the corridor opened into a vast dome, and there it was, the Solara Chamber in its full, impossible glory. It was larger than she'd imagined, not just a spa, but a cathedral beneath the sea. Columns of polished marble rose from the floor, draped in coral like forgotten saints. Gold dust shimmered through the water, catching on her light like stardust. The pool at the center was vast, circular, rimmed with gilded edges and carvings that told a story she couldn't quite read. Figures kneeling before a rising sun, hands lifted in both reverence and fear. At the far end, steps led down into the heart of the pool into darkness that seemed too deep for such shallow water. She floated above it, weightless, awestruck. My God, she breathed through the regulator. It's all still here. Her light caught movement below, not a shape, but reflection. Something gleamed beneath the layer of sediment, straight lines, uniform stacks. The beam shifted across their edges, revealing corners, metal sheen, regularity. Gold, hundreds, no, thousands of bars, lying buried beneath time. Elena's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her mask. She filmed everything, sweeping the camera slowly across the pool, the symbols, the impossible geometry of the place. But even as she documented it, a chill ran through her. The air, or rather, the water, felt charged, electric. The deeper she swam, the louder the hum became. It wasn't the sound of current or machinery. It was vibration, low, harmonic, ancient. It resonated through her chest, into her bones. She turned toward the carved walls. The mural there had changed since she'd first seen it, or perhaps she was only now seeing it fully illuminated. The same woman stood beneath the sun, her arms raised toward light, but now her face was visible, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. Gold poured from her hands into the water below. Elena's light flickered, dimmed. The hum deepened. For a moment, she lost control of her buoyancy. Something unseen tugged at her, pulling her downward toward the gold. Panic surged through her veins. She kicked hard, forcing herself up, but the pull grew stronger. The sediment began to swirl, rising like a storm of glittering dust. Let go. A voice whispered. It wasn't in her head. It was in the water. The same voice she'd heard in her recording. Low, distant, impossible. She spun around, light flashing across the chamber. Nothing there. No shadow, no shape. Only gold, endlessly reflecting her panic back at her. Her oxygen alarm beeped. She kicked toward the entrance, her light catching the edge of something metallic near the wall, a circular mechanism, half buried in coral, a lever or valve, marked with the Solara insignia. The 13th ray glowed faintly beneath the grime. She reached for it without thinking, and the moment her glove brushed the metal, the hum stopped. The silence was absolute, a stillness so complete it felt like the ocean itself had vanished. Then, slowly, the walls began to glow. The carvings lit from within, gold veins pulsing with liquid light, one after another, like a heart restarting after years of dormancy. Elena froze. Her camera trembled in her hand. The mural woman's eyes flared first, then the sun behind her ignited, spilling gold light into the pool. The water shimmered violently. The pressure shifted. She tried to swim upward, but the current reversed, pulling her down hard. Her light spun wildly as the gold beneath her erupted, billowing up in a storm of blinding dust. Her scream echoed only in her chest as the world around her vanished in brilliance. For a long moment there was nothing, then silence again. When she finally broke the surface, gasping under the collapsed terrace, the sky was bleeding orange. Hours had passed. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. She dragged herself onto the rocks, coughing seawater and gold dust. The waves rolled against the ruins like a heartbeat, easing back into rhythm. The world felt wrong, now tilted, vibrating faintly beneath her palms. She looked back toward the opening she descended through. It was gone. The sea had sealed it again. Only her camera remained, flickering faintly with static. She held it to her chest and whispered hoarsely, "It's real. It's all real." But in the fading light, she noticed something that made her stomach twist. Streaks of gold dust along the rocks, leading inland, as if the sea had left footprints behind. And far off, on the horizon, lightning flashed once more, not white, but gold. The sea wasn't done with her. As dusk swallowed the coast, Elena sat trembling against the ruins, unable to tell if the light around her was sunset or something glowing from below. The chamber had opened, and the world above would never be the same again. The next morning arrived pale and hollow, like the world had been drained of color. The sea was calm again, unnaturally calm, but the silence carried weight, as if the storm had taken more than just the coastline with it. The air smelled of rust and something else, faint but distinct, a metallic sweetness that reminded her of the gold dust still clinging to her skin. Elena sat on the terrace of the ruined resort, a blanket around her shoulders, her dive camera resting in her lap. She hadn't watched the footage yet. Part of her was afraid to. The device felt heavier than it should, as though the sea had filled it with more than images. She turned it over in her hands, studying the faint scratches on its casing lines that almost resembled writing. Not random, not natural, 3 curved rays, a sun's fragment, her breath hitched, the Solara mark. Etched by the sea itself, she wiped her hands, pressed the playback button. The screen flickered to life, the feed grainy but intact. For a moment, all she saw was her own descent bubbles rising, light wavering, her breath loud in the regulator. Then came the chamber, the gold light, the carvings igniting like veins, and then static. The image warped, distorting into ribbons of gold and black. But through the noise, she caught glimpses. A face reflected in the mural, eyes open beneath the water, the sunburst emblem spinning like a wheel, and a hand reaching toward her lens from the dark. She stopped the footage, the camera hissed softly as though breathing, her pulse pounded in her throat. That face, those eyes, they weren't hers. A sudden sound broke through the still air, a dull metallic clang, echoing from somewhere deep within the resort. She froze, straining to listen. Another clang, slow, rhythmic, coming from below. She grabbed her flashlight and moved carefully through the cracked halls. The sound grew louder, metallic against stone, reverberating through the foundations. It came from the direction of the old maintenance stairwell, the same path she'd used to reach the chamber the day before. When she reached it, her stomach turned. The opening she'd seen sealed by the sea had returned, but the water was lower now, receding unnaturally fast, exposing the stone steps that spiraled into darkness. Each clang echoed again, followed by a faint hiss, like air escaping a sealed chamber. Elena's rational mind faltered. The sea didn't behave this way. Water didn't drain like this, but the pull was irresistible. She descended. The deeper she went, the warmer the air became, humid, metallic, pulsing faintly. Her flashlight beam trembled across the wet walls. Golden veins now streaked through the stone, glowing faintly like capillaries. She touched one, and heat radiated beneath her fingertips, steady and alive. At the bottom, the corridor she had entered before stood open again. The air shimmered with humidity, and the faint scent of salt and iron filled her lungs. The golden glow had dimmed since yesterday, but not gone. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat buried deep within the architecture. Her flashlight beam caught movement ahead, small, flickering, not water, not reflection, a candle. She blinked, disbelief freezing her mid-step. Someone had lit a candle down here. It burned in the center of the passage, melted into the marble floor, wax dripping like pale blood. A few feet beyond it, something else, a book, soaked but intact, bound in dark leather. She knelt, hesitating before touching it. The cover bore the same emblem, Solara, embossed faintly in fading gold. She opened it carefully. The pages were warped, written in tight, precise handwriting, not notes, but scripture. The purification begins where light meets the drowned. The sea is our altar, the gold our sacrifice. The 13th must remain asleep. Her eyes moved down the page, scanning hastily. To awaken the light is to unseal the debt. The gold is not treasure, but sin crystallized. It must not rise. Elena's breath came uneven. The words swam before her eyes. This wasn't a spa at all. It was a vault, a burial. She turned the page, her fingers trembling. A sketch stared back at her, a diagram of the chamber itself. The central pool, the radiating rays, the sublevels beneath. The 13th ray wasn't just symbolic. It led deeper, spiraling downward into what was labeled Soul Sanctum. Beneath it, a final note, scrawled hastily in different ink. If the chamber opens, seal it with the sea. A shiver ran through her. The storm hadn't been nature. It had been defense. Before she could think, a faint echo stirred behind her, a wet, dragging sound. She froze, heart hammering. Slowly, she turned the beam of her light toward the sound. Something moved at the far end of the corridor, a silhouette, faint and wavering, human-shaped, but too still, too quiet. Hello, her voice cracked through the air. No answer. The shape shifted a slow, graceful motion, head turning toward her. She couldn't see its face, but light caught on something around its neck, a chain, gleaming faintly gold. Her instincts screamed to run, but her feet refused to move. She blinked once, and the shape was gone. Only dripping water remained, falling from the ceiling in perfect intervals, like the ticking of a clock. She stumbled backward, clutching the book. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. The candle ahead still burned. Its flame didn't waver, even though the air now swirled with a cold breeze. Then, slowly, impossibly, the candle began to move, sliding across the marble floor, as though carried by an unseen hand. It stopped right at the water's edge, then extinguished itself. The glow beneath the surface brightened again. Elena's breath trembled. No, she whispered, not again. But the sea answered anyway. The hum rose from below, that same deep vibration that lived somewhere between sound and thought. The water rippled, gold dust swirling to the surface like breath. She stumbled back, clutching the book to her chest. The pages fluttered open by themselves, stopping on one line she hadn't read yet. The sea remembers those who disturb its sleep. The words bled as water dripped onto the page, turning ink into red streaks. She bolted for the stairwell, climbing fast, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The hum grew louder, deeper, chasing her upward until it felt like the whole structure vibrated beneath her. When she burst out into the open air, the wind hit her like a wall. The sea was rising again, not in waves, but in height, as if the entire ocean were lifting itself toward the sky. The horizon burned with faint gold. Elena ran to the terrace and dropped the book onto the stone. The wind flipped its pages wildly, scattering bits of wet parchment across the ruins. She fell to her knees, breathing hard, watching the sea shift, color blue fading to amber. From below, the sound of the hum became a roar, and then she saw it, faint but undeniable. The water directly above where the chamber had been began to bulge outward, like something beneath was pushing against it. The surface cracked with golden light. Elena's voice broke as she whispered, "God, what did I do?" The bulge subsided slowly, settling into stillness. The light dimmed. The sea went quiet again, perfectly calm, as though nothing had happened. But she knew better. The silence was a lie. The ocean was holding its breath again. She stood trembling, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting now, but it wasn't red or orange, it was pale gold, the same shade as the dust that clung to her hands. She picked up the camera once more, pressed record, and spoke through tears that she didn't quite understand. Day 7, Solara chamber active. Confirmation it's not just a vault, it's containment, the gold, it's the seal, whatever's beneath it's alive, and if I've weakened that seal. Her voice faltered, then the sea won't be enough to hold it. She turned off the recorder and sank to the ground, the sound of distant thunder echoing like a heartbeat in the distance. The ocean glimmered faintly in the dying light, a mirror of liquid gold stretching to infinity. The storm had unearthed the chamber, her curiosity had awakened it, and now the silence meant only one thing: it was listening. As darkness swallowed the coast, Elena whispered to the sea one last time, voice trembling, almost a prayer. "If you took this place once, you can take it again." But no answer came. Only the faint shimmer below, patient, knowing, waiting for her next descent. And as the night deepened, she realized the truth that chilled her to her core: the gold hadn't been buried to be found. It had been buried to keep something else inside. The ocean's silence wasn't peace. It was warning. The storm had receded into memory, but the unease it left behind clung to the coast like mist. The sea was quiet again, too quiet. For 3 days, the waves had moved in silence, as if the ocean were holding its breath, listening. Elena Marlowe hadn't left the resort. She couldn't. The world beyond the cliffs felt unreal now: the chatter of markets, the mundane rhythm of the living. Here, only the whisper of wind and the pulse of the tide existed, and both of them had begun to sound almost human. But this morning, something new stirred. It began with movement on the horizon, a flicker, distant but deliberate. She raised her binoculars. A small motorboat cut through the glassy surface of the sea, heading straight for her stretch of coastline. Her chest tightened. No one came out this far anymore, not willingly. The boat slowed near the outer rocks, its engine muttering before dying altogether. A man stood at the bow, tall, still, scanning the ruins through a pair of dark lenses. He wasn't dressed like a local fisherman. His clothes were too clean, his posture too steady. Elena lowered the binoculars slowly. For the first time since buying this cursed place, she felt watched. By midday, the man had vanished. But footprints appeared near the old gate, boot marks pressed deep into wet earth, heading toward the cliffs and back again, as if he had come close enough to look, but not enough to be seen. That night, she couldn't bring herself to light the lantern. She sat in darkness, listening to the wind move through the corridors. At first, it was only wind, then faintly a metallic hum. Not the ocean this time, something higher, mechanical. She stepped onto the terrace and froze. Above her, red lights blinked in the sky. A drone. It hovered motionless for several seconds, its camera eye glinting like a second moon. She took one step back, and it reacted, turned slightly, followed her movement. Her breath caught. The machine held its position a moment longer, then drifted away toward the cliffs, vanishing into the dark. By morning, she found it again, not the drone, but what it left behind. Embedded in the sand near the terrace steps, half buried, lay a small object the size of her palm, a transmitter, cracked but blinking faintly. She picked it up with a trembling hand. The device was commercial, grade. She'd seen models like it in expedition documentaries used for geolocation and live imaging. Someone had been recording her dives. She smashed it against the stone until it stopped blinking. The feeling of being alone, once comforting, now turned suffocating. The resort's silence was no longer solitude, it was surveillance. By the third day, she saw him again, the man, standing at the edge of the village road, speaking to one of the fishermen. When Elena approached, both men stopped talking. The fisherman turned away quickly, pretending to busy himself with a net, but the stranger didn't move. "Dr. Marlowe," he greeted her, his voice calm, accented faintly, not local, but not foreign either. His tone was too precise, too measured. "You've been difficult to find." Her stomach twisted. "Who are you?" He smiled, small and polite. "Ronan Vex, documentary filmmaker. I study abandoned places, the sea's memory, you might say." His words were pleasant, but they rang hollow like a script rehearsed too often. Elena crossed her arms. This coastline isn't open for filming. It's private property." He tilted his head. "I know, that's why I asked the locals who owns it. A rare purchase, really. $250 for a place that once held emperors of industry. A marine archaeologist buying a resort drowned by time poetic. Don't you think?" Her chest tightened. "How do you know what I do?" "Oh," he said softly, his smile widening, "I do my research." A pause. Only the gulls cried between them. Ronan adjusted his sunglasses, eyes unreadable. "I'm fascinated by what you're trying to uncover. The Solara Spa, that's what it was called. Yes, strange place, closed in the 40s under unusual circumstances." Elena said nothing. He continued. "They say the founder, Edric Solara, disappeared during a storm. Others say he sealed something under the resort, something valuable enough to drown for." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You've been diving, haven't you?" Her throat went dry. "You need to leave." Ronan didn't move. "I'm not here to interfere, just to observe, to record history before it's lost." His gaze drifted toward the sea, then back to her. "But you've already found something, haven't you?" She turned away before answering. "If you set one foot on my property again, I'll call the authorities." He smiled again, that same practiced calm. "Of course, I respect boundaries, for now." As he walked away, she felt the air tighten, like the world itself had narrowed. The sound of his boots on gravel lingered long after he vanished down the hill. That night she heard the drone again. This time there were two. Their hum circled the resort, weaving between the collapsed towers like vultures over a carcass. Red eyes glinted in the mist, capturing everything: the walls, the debris, her silhouette standing defiant on the terrace. She grabbed a metal rod and hurled it toward the nearest one. It missed, clanging uselessly against the stone. The drones retreated, but not far. They hovered at a distance, watching. She smashed both lanterns, plunging the place into darkness. When dawn came, she found another object by the door, a waterproof envelope. Inside, a single photograph. It was her, underwater, in the Solara chamber. She dropped it instantly, heart racing. The image was perfectly framed, her torchbeam, the columns, the gold swirling like dust around her. But she'd been alone that day. No one else could have taken that picture, unless someone had been below. On the back of the photo, written in elegant handwriting, "The sea keeps secrets, but so do people." No name, no signature, just that single line. Elena burned the photograph over the sink, but the words remained in her mind, etched like scars. By evening, she packed what little equipment she could, not to leave but to hide. She sealed the entrances to the lower corridors, nailed shut the old office, covered the terrace windows. The resort became her bunker. She sat by the broken fountain, candlelight flickering against the marble. Her hands trembled as she spoke into her recorder, voice raw and weary. Someone's watching, possibly connected to Solara archives. He called himself Ronan Vex, claims to be a documentarian, carries high-end imaging gear, surveillance, grade drones. She paused, swallowing hard. "I think he knows about the gold, maybe even about what's below it. I have to protect the site until I understand what I've found." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The sea isn't the only thing keeping secrets anymore." Outside, the tide rolled in slow and heavy, each wave slapping against the rocks like the closing of a fist, and from the cliffs above, unseen through the fog, a faint red light blinked once, twice. Watching her candle burn, as the wind rose, carrying the scent of salt and storm, Elena realized something deeper than fear. She wasn't the only one waiting for the ocean to speak again. Someone else was listening, too. The fog rolled in thick that night, swallowing the world one breath at a time. The resort disappeared into it, the balconies, the broken archways, even the sea. Everything became sound, The hiss of wind through cracks, the drip of condensation down walls, the whisper of unseen movement. Elena sat near the boarded window, shotgun across her knees. She'd found it in a rusted storage locker, probably left behind by one of the caretakers decades ago. The weapon was old but solid, and now it was all that stood between her and the shadows moving beyond the walls. The camera from her last dive still flickered on the table beside her. Every few minutes it hissed softly, as if something inside it was trying to breathe. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it, not yet. It was proof of what? She wasn't sure anymore. Proof of discovery or proof of madness. A soft noise snapped her from thought, the crunch of gravel outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. She killed the candle and moved silently toward the door. Through the cracked frame, she saw a faint red blink through the mist, the reflection of a drone light, hovering low. But this time it wasn't alone. Another glow shimmered behind it, higher, broader. A lantern. She watched as the figure emerged from the fog. Ronan Vex. His coat was drenched, his face expressionless, his camera slung at his side. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted her to see him. "Elena," he called out softly, voice calm, almost gentle. "You're making this more difficult than it has to be." Her breath caught. "Get off my property." He took another step closer, his boots crunching on wet stone. "You don't understand. I'm not your enemy. You're flying machines over my roof, planting transmitters, photographing me underwater. That's what you call friendship." He stopped at the edge of the terrace, lantern light spilling across his face. For the first time, she saw something beneath his calm, not anger, not threat, but pity. "Elena," he said, lowering his voice, "you found something that was never meant to be found. You don't realize the kind of history you're standing on." "I've read the history," she snapped. "Solara built this place to hide stolen gold. I found what he buried. That's it." Ronan shook his head slowly. "You think it's about gold?" A chill ran through her. His words didn't sound like speculation, they sounded like knowledge. He took a slow step forward. "That chamber below you, it's not a vault, it's containment. The Solara family wasn't laundering treasure. They were burying it because it was alive." Elena raised the shotgun, her voice shaking. "Stop." He stopped, not out of fear, but with the stillness of someone used to being obeyed. "You opened it, didn't you?" She hesitated. The brief pause was enough. His face hardened, the polite mask slipping. "The moment you disturbed it, sensors we've had on the seabed for decades lit up like fire. I came because I thought I could contain it before someone got hurt." Her heart pounded. "Who's we?" Ronan exhaled. "The people who have been keeping this thing buried since 1943. He stepped closer again. "That gold isn't yours, Dr. Marlowe. It never belonged to anyone. It's something else, something that's been calling to whoever touches it. You felt it, didn't you? The dreams, the hum, the light that never fades." Elena's grip tightened on the weapon. "You don't know what I felt." But he smiled faintly, like a man who already knew the ending to a story. "Yes, I do, because everyone who's touched it feels the same thing. Solara himself went mad trying to contain it. The vault wasn't a spa. It was a sacrament, a ritual to seal the hunger of the light." The wind rose, whistling through the cracks around them. Behind Ronan, the sea began to churn, subtle but unmistakable. The tide was changing again, faster than it should. She lowered the gun slightly, torn between disbelief and dread. "If that's true, then why are you here? Why not let it stay buried?" "Because you woke it," he said simply. "And now it's spreading." He pointed toward the cliffside. In the distance, faint glimmers shimmered along the rocks, not lightning, not reflection, but golden light leaking from the cracks in the earth. Elena's stomach dropped. The veins of the Solara chamber, they were rising. She looked back at Ronan, his expression grave. "We can still seal it, but I need your cooperation. I need access to your footage, your readings, your dives. Otherwise, this place will become a fracture point, and the ocean doesn't forgive those." Her eyes narrowed. "You're lying," he sighed softly. "If I wanted to hurt you, I already would have. I'm trying to save you and everyone else." Before she could answer, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The sea crashed violently against the cliffs, sending spray high into the air. Elena stumbled, bracing against the wall. Ronan turned toward the water, face lit by the rising glow beneath the waves. The gold light was spreading, tendrils of it weaving through the current, spiraling outward like veins of fire under glass. The hum returned deep, resonant, vibrating through the air until the ruins themselves began to moan. Ronan shouted over the sound, "It's waking again. Do you understand now?" Elena's voice trembled. "What's waking?" He turned to her, his expression fierce. "The thing Solara built to hold whatever he stole from the sea. The chamber isn't a vault, it's a heart." Lightning tore across the sky, white and gold, striking the horizon where the glow was brightest. The earth split further, the resort's walls cracking open with it. Ronan grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the hall. "We have to move," she ripped free. "Why should I trust you? Because if you stay," he said, his voice raw, "you won't live long enough to decide." A deafening crack split the air. The cliffside began to crumble, slabs of stone falling into the boiling surf below. Elena hesitated for one last heartbeat, then followed him into the dark. The roar of the sea chased them through the collapsing corridors as walls buckled and ceilings dripped salt water. When they finally stopped inside what remained of the grand lobby, both were shaking, drenched, breathless. The hum had faded again, replaced by the whisper of receding waves. Ronan wiped the seawater from his face and looked at her with eyes that held something between exhaustion and warning. "You think you found treasure," he said softly. "But what you've really found is a door, and the ocean never builds a door unless something once walked through it." Elena stared back, her pulse still racing. The candle she'd left on the table earlier had been extinguished, but the wax wasn't cold. It was warm, soft, and beside it, pressed into the melted surface, was a perfect symbol, 13 rays of a sun. She lifted her gaze slowly to Ronan. He hadn't moved, but in the flickering lightning through the window, she could have sworn she saw the gold glint faintly behind his eyes. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the tide reversed, pulling back too far, too fast, revealing the black mouth of the Solara chamber far below, open once again. The sea wasn't retreating. It was preparing to take something back. As thunder cracked and the ground trembled beneath her feet, Elena realized that Ronan's arrival hadn't been coincidence. He hadn't come to watch the shore. He'd come to claim what was sleeping beneath it. And as the wind howled through the hollow bones of the resort, Elena Marlowe understood. She was no longer the only one who had heard the sea's call. After the storms, fury broke and silence returned. The ruins seemed older, as if every drop of rain had washed away the present and left only the bones of history. The wind no longer howled. It whispered, carrying a faint metallic scent that clung to the air like memory. Elena Marlowe sat in the gutted lobby beside the broken fountain, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled of salt. The waves had calmed, and so had Ronan, though the calm in him was the kind that hides a storm behind the eyes. They hadn't spoken since the night the cliffs split open. The sea had retreated again, covering the glowing fractures as if nothing had happened. But she could still feel it, the hum below the surface, the heartbeat in the water. Now, morning light crept through the shattered glass roof in fractured beams, illuminating the dust that floated between them. Ronan stood near the entrance, studying the horizon. His clothes were torn, his jaw set tight. "You need to rest," Elena said quietly, her voice hoarse. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Rest doesn't stop what's coming. You talk like you know exactly what this is. I do. He walked toward her slowly. Because it's not the first time the chamber has awakened. Her pulse quickened. What do you mean? Ronan didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small waterproof case from his satchel and placed it on the table. When he opened it, the air filled with the scent of mildew and salt-aged paper. Inside were photographs, maps, and a single leather-bound book, brittle and stained with water damage. Elena leaned forward. "What is this?" "The original owner's journal," Ronan said. "Edric Solara's personal ledger. My employer retrieved it decades ago from a private archive in Lisbon." She reached for it, but he held her gaze. "You'll want to see what's inside before you decide to touch it." He turned the pages with careful fingers. The handwriting was ornate, looping, meticulous, the sort of script written by men who believed themselves eternal. The ink had faded to sepia, but the words were still legible. Ronan read aloud, "Gold is not merely wealth, it is light made solid. The world worships light, we only give it form. Yet every light casts a shadow, and ours grows beneath the sea." Elena swallowed hard. "He sounds delusional." Ronan's eyes flicked toward her. "Or brilliant. Depends on your faith in what he was trying to contain." He turned another page. "They say the ocean purifies. But I have seen the opposite. The deeper we build, the louder the whisper becomes. The water speaks through the walls, through the men. It wants its gold back." Elena sat still, the words sinking like stones. He knew what it was doing to them. Ronan nodded, and he tried to stop it. That's what the chamber was for. Not a vault, a coffin. He placed a finger on the next passage. "The 13th ray must remain sealed. If it breathes again, the sea will not forgive us. The light will consume everything that bears its reflection." Elena whispered, "The 13th ray." Ronan looked at her. "The same one you saw glowing under the mural. You didn't open it completely, but you cracked it. That was enough." She pushed back from the table, pacing. "You keep saying enough. Enough for what?" He closed the book slowly. "For the gold to remember." The silence that followed felt colder than the wind. Elena turned away, running her hands through her hair. "You make it sound like it's alive." Ronan's tone was flat. "You've seen it move, haven't you?" She froze. "You've been watching everything. Since the first day you arrived," he said. "We monitor sites like this, places where Solara's family built their sanctuaries. There are more of them, scattered across the coastlines of the old world, but only this one still hums." She stared at him, disbelief tightening into anger. "You let me go down there? You let me touch it? You wouldn't have listened if I'd stopped you? You think this is about curiosity?" she snapped. "That I came here chasing myths. I was trying to survive. I bought this place because I had nothing left, and now you tell me I've woken some buried curse." Ronan's expression softened for the first time. "Not a curse, Elena, a consequence." He opened another folder. From the case inside were yellowed photos. Divers in heavy suits standing beside enormous crates hauled from the sea, their faces hidden behind masks. Another image showed a ballroom filled with gilded statues and chandeliers, but every face in the picture looked blurred, as if the photograph itself had tried to forget them. "These were taken in 1941, he said, "before the flood. Solara's men smuggled confiscated gold through here, stolen art, relics, anything that shimmered. But something in that last shipment wasn't from any bank or vault. It came from the ocean floor." Elena leaned closer. "What was it?" Ronan hesitated. "A relic pulled from a Spanish galleon off the coast of Morocco. They thought it was a statue, solid gold, shaped like the sun, but the divers said it pulsed, like it was breathing." She felt her stomach twist. "And they brought it here?" He nodded. "Solara believed it was divine, that he could harness it. But when they placed it in the chamber, men started hearing things, seeing things, some went missing. Others walked into the sea and never returned. When the storm of 43 hit, he ordered the vault sealed and the resort abandoned. He believed the ocean itself was trying to take it back. Elena sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling. The ledger lay open between them, the ink faintly glimmering under the fractured light, as though the words themselves remembered. Ronan continued, quieter now. We found fragments of that statue years later. It wasn't gold. It was some kind of alloy unknown to metallurgy. When exposed to air, it vibrated. When exposed to water. He looked up at her. It sang. The memory of the hum returned to her, the low vibration she'd felt through her bones, the whisper that had echoed her name. Her voice broke. You're saying it's still down there? He nodded once. The relic, or what's left of it, became the heart of the chamber. Solara built the spa above it to mask the facility. The baths, the vents, the salt systems, all of it was designed to keep the thing submerged, to keep it asleep. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, her thoughts spinning. Then the gold, all those bars, they weren't currency. No, Ronan said, they were anchors, lined with the same alloy to keep it stable. But gold doesn't bind forever. Over time, it remembers its shape and seeks its source. Her eyes widened. That's why the tide's been changing. He met her gaze grimly. It's rising because it's waking. For a long time, neither spoke. The sea outside murmured against the cliffs, gentle, now deceptive, almost tender. Elena finally whispered, Why tell me all this? Why not just take the ledger and leave? Ronan hesitated. Because it's already attached itself to you. Her heart stopped. What? The dust? He said quietly. The shimmer on your hands, it's part of it now. It reacts to contact, to curiosity. You breathed it, touched it, carried it back to the surface. You're the connection. Elena's breath came short. You mean it's in me? Ronan didn't answer directly. He only said, You opened the door, Elena. Now it's looking through you. The words hung in the air like fog, heavy, irreversible. She turned toward the broken window, staring out at the pale horizon. The tide had risen again subtly, but unnaturally fast. The water kissed the base of the resort's outer walls, glowing faintly in the morning light. She whispered, Then how do we stop it? Ronan looked down at the ledger, at the old words that had doomed generations before them. If it breathes again, seal it with the sea. He closed the book with finality by giving it back what it wants. Elena's voice trembled. You mean sink it again? Ronan nodded slowly. Sink everything. The silence that followed was almost wholly the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath before judgment. Elena stared at the sea, golden light flickering faintly beneath its surface like a heart still beating. And for the first time, she realized that what lay below wasn't simply treasure or curse. It was something older than both, something the ocean had once swallowed to protect the world, and she had brought it back into the light. As the wind rose and the sea whispered against the broken walls, Elena whispered the only truth she could now bear to speak. Then the sea must take it again. But somewhere deep beneath the waves, the hum began to rise once more, low, rhythmic, patient, as if it had heard her and was already answering. The following night settled over the ruins like a confession, quiet, heavy, unblinking. The candlelight in the grand lobby flickered over the ledger's open pages, throwing moving shadows across the walls as if the ink itself refused to rest. Outside, the tide breathed against the rocks, and every exhale sounded like a warning. Elena sat hunched at the table, her fingers trembling above the brittle parchment. The ledger's scent was salt, dust, and something metallic, faint, but unmistakable. Ronan stood a few paces away, his reflection fractured in the broken glass of the window, his silhouette framed against the sea. Neither had spoken in hours. When Elena finally broke the silence, her voice was barely above a whisper. You said there were other sanctuaries like this. Ronan turned, eyes dark beneath the candlelight. Yes, Solara didn't build just one vault. There were 6 recorded sites along old trade routes, each one a mirror of the first. But this, he gestured toward the shattered walls, was the heart, the only one where the original artifact was ever placed. She stared at him. What happened to the others? He hesitated, collapsed, flooded, erased by time or by men who understood that not everything ancient deserves to survive. Elena ran her fingertips across the open page. The ink shimmered faintly again, not reflection, not moisture. It moved, slowly, as if it breathed when the tide shifted. "Read this," she said, sliding the ledger toward him. Her finger pointed to the margin where faint writing, different from Solara's hand, had been added later in smaller, hurried strokes. Ronan squinted at it, his expression tightening. The voice beneath grows louder. "It knows our names. We built a house of light and trapped the dark within it, but the walls remember what they hold." Elena exhaled shakily. "You said he wanted to contain it."